Well, hello, Matthew. This is Emmet and Matt from Good Soil Investment Management. We're happy to have you on today to pick your brain a little bit on Roblox and this thing called the Metaverse everyone's kind of referring to that we all kind of know is coming. It's the new buzzword, and kind of wanted to see what you thought about it and Roblox and how it might or might not fit into it. How's it going? You're out of Hong Kong, right, Matthew?
Yes, as we say in Cantonese, Joseon, good morning. It's in the morning time in Hong Kong here, and we're recording on Thursday morning here. So, yeah, no, everything is quite dandy. The weather's really nice. It's great hiking weather in Hong Kong right now.
Good, good. And you're an analyst for Bloomberg, is that right? Tell us a little bit about your background, if you don't mind.
Yes, so I'm a senior equity research analyst at Bloomberg Intelligence. For Bloomberg professional subscribers, you can access BI, as we call it, using the function BI Go on your Bloomberg terminal. Bloomberg Intelligence was formed about 12 years ago to provide research and insight on the vast data sets the Bloomberg terminal contains. Since then, it's evolved to have over 400 analysts in multiple geographies, the Americas, Europe, and Asia now. We cover about 2,000 companies. We cover credits. We have strategists across equities and fixed income. We have a whole FIC team. And we're even expanding into litigation research. We've expanded into ESG research, which is another new big buzzword in the market right now. So, really providing a one-stop solution for your research needs.
Great. And how long have you worked with Bloomberg for, if you don't mind me asking?
I've been with BI for almost 8 years now, 7.5,
Wow.
closing in on 8 years. I've worked my way up through the ranks. So I'm pretty much out of university with a short stop at a startup along the way. I went to University of Michigan, go Blue, for undergraduate business school at the Ross School of Business there.
Okay.
I went
And
there for graduate school, and I was at Michigan State for undergrad. So I'm a little bit of a torn soul, but I'm glad to know
It's a
that
rough
our paths
week.
crossed. It is,
they
yeah.
hate each other,
And
don't they?
we got
Michigan and Michigan State?
they do, and we've got they're playing each other this weekend, so both undefeated, which is very unusual. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. So, Matthew, if is there a certain I mean, Roblox we're going to specialize mostly talking about and stuff. Like, how much of your time now do you spend kind of analyzing Roblox versus what other companies are kind of in your space, and how would you kind of define your space or what your specialty is within the Bloomberg community?
Yeah, so my coverage area is largely now focused on the Asian internet space, but previously I'd covered the online game sector globally. So that included Roblox up until just recently when I transferred that coverage back to the States. But I think the metaverse is a pervasive theme that's affecting all internet companies globally, and it's something I plan to continue to drive the thought leadership on for Bloomberg Intelligence. Even while giving up the online games coverage. 10 cents within my coverage. Obviously, they're still the
Sure.
biggest gaming company in the world, and they're going to be a key driver of the metaverse. And in case you didn't realize, they're a huge investor. Not huge, but they have a stake in Roblox. They have a
Sure.
stake in Epic Games. That's pretty huge. So not even just directly, but indirectly, they're also a massive player in the gaming sector, and then how the metaverse develops. One of the things that we're doing, I've launched a podcast myself. You can check it out. It's currently on SoundCloud. It's called Into the Metaverse.
Oh,
We're
wow.
launching on Apple and Spotify soon, so stay tuned for the launch there. It's with
Okay.
myself and an industry, expert, Jonathan Ross Friedman. He's the CEO of Super Social. They
Okay.
are making games and experiences for the metaverse, starting with Roblox. So it's a really interesting podcast we're putting together. Our next
Wow.
episode is going to be quite interesting with the general manager of the Unreal Engine business at Epic Games and how the
Oh,
metaverse
wow.
is affecting the development of Unreal Engine. So should be
Wow.
quite interesting there. So
Yeah.
stay tuned and check that out when it comes out next week.
It's called Into the Metaverse, the name of the podcast. And the first episode was next week, or you've had several episodes, and this is just the newest one coming up?
We've recorded 2 episodes. So the first was
Okay.
just Yon and I spitballing kind of a primer on the metaverse. The second, we had
Oh, nice.
a brand
Okay.
expert, a consultant expert, Kathy Hackle, discuss the brand opportunities in the metaverse. And so now we're going deep into the technology underpinning the metaverse.
Cool, cool. And now I mean, how would everyone kind of defines metaverse a little differently? I mean, if you had to try to define it in like a simplest way, what would you like? How would you like try to broadly define it just for our audience? Because we're probably going to use that word a lot, and just wanted to see what you would say for that.
This is something that I don't think there's still a consensus on, and something that, as part of our podcast, we're trying to define, and we're asking every guest this question.
Hmm.
For me, I think the metaverse is defined as something that is persistent, shared, social, 3D, and virtual. And I think the key difference between an online game virtual world and a metaverse is the persistence of it and the social features that are elevated beyond just a social game features. I think that's really where you differentiate between an online game and a metaverse platform. You know, and then you start layering in live event opportunities that are much more on top of that. And just to say what the metaverse is not, the metaverse is not a device. You know, a lot of people still have the Ready Player One VR headset, you know, lock yourself away from the world, and
Yeah.
that's not the metaverse. You know, the metaverse is not a single device. It's literally the next evolution of the internet. It's the next level evolution of social networks, and that's the right way to think about it.
I like
So
that.
you're clearly, you know, thinking beyond just gaming. You know, Roblox is the one that we talk about a lot, but the metaverse really is much more broad than that. So you mentioned brand opportunities within the metaverse. I'm wondering, you know, what did you think about kind of the Snap earnings call this past week? I'm not sure if that's exactly in your coverage territory, but it seems like the themes there would certainly intersect a lot with kind of the privacy issues that they saw and kind of how brands are going to kind of navigate some of these privacy concerns during this kind of weird transition period we're in with, you know, iOS upgrades and kind of an increase in security concerns. What's your thought on kind of that space and how that evolves over time?
I think first off, you're definitely seeing some companies were better prepared than others for the shift to iOS 15 and ATT than others. Like Facebook, the impact was less than they expected, right? And Twitter, I don't think they have anything together necessarily to know what the impact was. That's what kind it sounds like. But, you know, it sounds like for them, the impact was less than they expected also. But, you know, the smaller companies like Snap and Pinterest, I believe, you know, reported much bigger impacts from the shift to iOS 15. You know, I think at the end of the day, this just reinforces the thesis that we've had. And I've looked at it from a gaming perspective, obviously, but you know, my whole thesis was that the largest networks, the largest platforms are going to do the best because they have the best data sets and the best capability to leverage those data sets. And it's really going to affect the smaller platforms, the smaller networks more, who are going to kind of be left in the dirt. You know, at the end of the day, you're going to rely on you know, 2 or 3 networks to be your key advertising channels. And this shift to a more privacy centric advertising network, and that's a whole house of cards that we could spend an hour just talking about by itself. But
Sure.
you know, just that shift itself, you know, is actually going to, you know, further oligopolize the industry, not actually make it more fair and more spread out and more equal.
Yeah. And speaking of kind of like Apple and how it affects all these companies and the metaverse in turn and such. And we saw Google kind of just recently reduce, I think, its fees from 30% to 15%. And do you think, I know Epic, Tim Sweeney from Epic has been fighting that battle, you know, the good fight for all the folks that are kind of afraid to fight it, I think. And do you think Apple's going to budge and come down from 30%? What's your kind of speculation on that? Or have you talked to people in the know that have opinions on it? Or what do you think, Matthew?
So, I mean, I've chatted with our litigation and our antitrust analysts because, you know, they're the real experts there. Because at the end
Sure.
of the day, this is a legal fight, both in the
Yeah.
courts and also with the legislation that's being written in Congress and other jurisdictions. And at the end of the day, it's a lot harder for them to say X price is the right price. And so, no, I don't think Apple will budge on the 30%. But it's a lot easier for them to enforce anti-steering laws, and you'll hear that term anti-steering a lot. That's a technical legal term. Really, in this case, what that means is Apple forcing you to use their payment system for in-app purchases, which then incurs the 30% Apple tax, as it's known, the commission. And so, you know, you've already seen them start to open up and enable, you know, companies to advertise alternative payments networks. And so, you know, if you were to use PayPal or Stripe or something else in lieu of Apple now, you can probably cut your fee from 30% to 5%. The
Oh,
problem
wow.
with doing that is using Apple is really frictionless, right? I play games, I spend money in mobile games, fully admit it, right? And
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
if it
It's
to buy
research for you,
something,
right?
yeah, it's a buy and could be a tax write off depending on which CPA you ask. But you know, if you try to buy something, you literally you decide, you know, you click the button buy, you hit okay, sign, you know, read my face because I have Face ID, and then you bought.
Yep.
That's it. Takes 5 seconds to go through all the hoops to use these external payment portals. It's going to launch an in-app browser inside of the app. You have to log into your payment network. You have to log into the app inside of the payment network. it can take a couple minutes. And so, we wrote a report a month ago or so, what's the price of friction? Because in this case, you're clearly going to have to incentivize people to make the shift to these alternative payment portals if you want to. How much do you have to discount the items in these alternative payment portals to offset, the increased friction of doing so? And we think the net gain won't be 25% net revenue. It'll be more close to 5 to 10%. We think there'll have to be significant discounts on these items to incentivize enough people to make the shift over to these alternative payments. And so, that's not a huge thing right now. But going forwards, if they can more deeply embed these alternative payments directly into the apps, which we think will happen with legislation down the line, then that changes the game. Then you can really start to see more money flow through to developers. And for those of you that don't know how these companies report revenue, most console and AAA game companies, the commission structure comes out of the revenue. So they report, a game that sells for $60, they'll report net revenue of $42, which is X that commission rate. For mobile games, they actually report all of the gross revenue 100%, and the commission comes out in their cost of goods sold. So for most of these companies, their EPS is going to go up tremendously regardless. For mobile game companies who are most, exposed here in terms of the Apple commissions, it means their gross margins are going to go from something in the order of high 60s to 70%, closer to 90, 95%, if they're able to, reduce the commission rate down to say 5% and shift to alternative payment methods.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. That's, a positive for a lot of these stocks and companies. And I mean, Roblox, the way I guess we see it is sort of like a platform. I think a lot of people misunderstand it as kind of a game or a gaming system, but it's, we kind of view it as a big platform where it has this huge ecosystem of creators now, or developers, hundreds of thousands of them, working to get. Some of them are teams of like dozens of people, and they're well funded by even venture capital firms even. And so these developers are incentivized to create these online experiences, not just games, all kinds of experiences, where the 40-something million daily active users choose, which ones they want to play. And the better the content, the more of them choose the ones with better content. That incentivizes people to make better content. It brings more users on when the content's better. It's like a vicious flywheel or a vicious cycle, that just self-fulfilling. And they've gotten this kind of critical mass where it's like past the event horizon where they're just going to explode over time. That's kind of what we feel, or our thesis. Whether it's, 1 year from now or 5 or 6 years from now, we think that it's just going to continue to, be more and more evident that they're going to have some slice of this metaverse through this big flywheel, because we don't see anyone really near that event horizon. Like some people talk about Steam or Sandbox. I mean, do you think there's any kind of competitors to that? What would you say is other than maybe, I guess you could say Epic and maybe Minecraft to some degree, but they're a little different, right? I mean, what would you say is the nearest competitors to Roblox?
I would say Epic is pretty much there. And I think for them, Fortnite creator mode hasn't taken off anywhere to the degree that, the UGC, the user generated content, you'll hear me say UGC a lot.
Yeah.
The UGC aspects of Roblox have taken off far more than Fortnite creator. But, I do think that Epic is right there alongside with Roblox in terms of leadership in the early days of the metaverse. Facebook has talked the talk. But even before they started talking metaverse, we wrote a report back in June, so about a month before they really openly started talking about the metaverse. And we did a market size analysis, and we forecast the metaverse opportunity to be close to $800 billion by 2024. There's your marketing pitch. And that full report's on BI Go for Bloomberg Professional subscribers. But, at the time, we thought Facebook was a dark horse. At the time, we looked at them and said, there's 10,000, 20% of their employees working on Oculus.
Yeah.
They're not just making Beat Saber. There's far more going on than just making Beat Saber there, right?
Yeah.
And so they have the user base, right? They have, we talk about Roblox having 40 million DAUs. Facebook has, 10x that, if not more, depending on, I don't know the exact DAUs. I know on the MAU side, they have, 2.5 billion MAUs, I think, right? And so, they have quite a user scale to contend with. There's obviously the trust and the brand issues that affect that company, but for the most part, just, in the last several years, it hasn't had a huge monstrous effect on their performance. I mean, and what was the stat that someone shared? Their last quarter, year on year, they grew their revenue in dollars more than Twitter's entire revenue. I think that's accurate.
Wow.
Even with all of the things that's going on in the negative headlines, right? And so, it is quite a juggernaut. And I mentioned Tencent in the beginning, and you can't talk about anything online entertainment without talking about Tencent. They're also going to be a leader. You mentioned Minecraft. I think Minecraft has a big opportunity. They've done some in-game live events like concerts, and I think that's something that's kind of hinting at their metaverse strategy. Obviously, they have the infrastructure being part of Microsoft with Azure to really, support what's going on. But at the end of the day, they haven't really articulated their strategy yet, and so it's still kind of a wait and see to see how they elevate Minecraft into a pure metaverse platform. Other than those, I think the one dark horse that now I'm watching, because Facebook's by no means a dark horse anymore, is ByteDance. That's the owner of TikTok, and the Chinese equivalent is Douyin. They recently bought a VR headset company based in China called Pico. They've been investing heavily in gaming content, and so I think when you start to put all those pieces together, there's quite an attractive metaverse strategy coming together there. And I would not put it past them to see metaverse. There's talks of them IPOing part or all of their business next year. I wouldn't be surprised if we hear a lot about the metaverse when that starts to happen.
And I mean, in terms of, I guess Roblox, what would you say the most like misunderstood thing is? Like when you talk to other folks or who pick your brain about or ask you about, what would you say some of, or the most, or a couple of the most misunderstood things are that, based on your research about Roblox that people have?
I'll be quite honest. I was skeptical for a while too, until I really started to see some of these, live events opportunities. I think the skeptical view is that it's just a game. But if you just go in and start playing Roblox, and I did this after, initial skepticism, and it's not a game that you or I or we would recognize, people our age. Our age, it's like Call of Duty. You go in and you kill people and you win, right? There's no winning in Roblox. It's like you don't win anything. You just do stuff. It's a completely different mentality, and it's more virtual socializing than it is actually playing a game. And I think that's why they talk about experiences and not games inside of the platform, because it really isn't a game in the traditional sense. So I think that's one of the misconceptions that drives a lot of skepticism. I think the other thing is they look at it and simply say, okay, you're making money just like gaming companies do. But at the end of the day, I think the biggest opportunities to come, and they started to talk about this in not the IPO, but the pre-listing investor day. And I'm sure they'll talk a lot more about these opportunities at the upcoming investor day next month, is, some of these live events and branded content opportunities. Within our 800 billion metaverse opportunity, yes, you have the gaming market, you have social media ads. And, as I mentioned, the metaverse is kind of the confluence of social networking and online games to create the next generation of social networks. So obviously those are big buckets of revenue, but live events, concerts, films, sports events coming into virtual platforms is a huge opportunity. We're starting to see this take off with concerts first. I think sports and films will come later. But you could feasibly see Roblox layering in $1 billion of concert revenue over the next few years. And they're doing about 2.6 billion run rate, 2.8 billion run rate as of this quarter. So that's quite a lot of upside just from concerts, not even the branded content side. I think branded content is a huge opportunity, and they're going to talk a lot about that. I think we'll hear a lot about that in the upcoming, investor day, in terms of, if you look at what they've done recently, the Gucci experience. I talk about this every time I talk to people about Roblox. For anyone that doesn't know, Gucci did a limited time experience inside of Roblox. It was basically a virtual Gucci store. And every day they had different items they sold. And on the last day, I think it was, they had this one unique item, a Dionysus virtual Gucci bag inside of the Gucci store in Roblox. It sold for the equivalent of $4,000 US.
Wow. So is that like an NFT inside Roblox? Would you call it like sort of like that, but Roblox controls it somehow? I mean, they only had a limited amount of them, right? So that like Roblox controls, it's sort of like a centralized NFT in a way through
Just
Roblox.
think of it as really rare items that you'd get in like World of Warcraft way back when, right? They're items that within the game are super valuable, but you can't take them out. And,
Can't take them out of
you
Roblox.
mentioned NFTs, and we could go way down the rabbit hole of crypto. I know you guys know Joe Kim. I chatted with Joe Kim, a while back. We did a podcast on Roblox, and, we talked about the crypto NFT opportunity. We'll see where they go, and if they decide to go down that route, if that's something they choose to do, and, open their platform to be more decentralized and based on blockchain so it can leverage these technologies. I'm not quite sure that's something they want to do anytime soon. I think for a
Yeah.
lot of large companies, there's regulatory concerns around opening up to those sorts of technologies. And so,
Yeah.
I think for now you'll see smaller developers push those technologies. But I think longer term, there's a huge if we just look at the real world, people buy fashion items, they buy collectibles, firstly, because they think it'll go up in value and someone will pay more for it, right? That's,
Yeah.
part way. But part B, I think, is digital or self-expression, right? You identify yourself through these items and you want to express yourself and you want people to associate you with what you think that item, tells about you. I think the same thing is going to be true in the virtual world. With your avatar, you're going to have this digital self-expression. You want your avatar and your digital self to reflect your the type of personality you want people to see in you. That if you're
Mhm.
carrying that $4,000 Gucci bag, that says something about you, and people want that
Yeah.
message to be sent and sent and heard. And so I think that aspect is extremely valuable, and that's why you're seeing such demand for not just NFTs but in-game cosmetics in general. On the order of the cosmetics market is purely cosmetics is something on the order of a $10 billion market globally just inside of online games, and sorry, globally ex China. And so
Mm.
that there's obviously an opportunity for NFTs and things there to increase the value of those items and make them transmissible. But even just within games, it's already a large market.
Yeah, and within games, like the thing about Roblox is like within the platform because it's like so many games and experiences combined. People can just like live much like my kids. I see it with them, 9, 7, and 5. They get like 2 hours on Saturday and Sunday each day to like play Roblox. Do whatever they can play Minecraft, Roblox, or some other games they've downloaded. And they've evolved to just spend the vast majority of their time on They just love all the different games. They jump from one to. They have other friends on it, and I feel like they prefer to live in that kind of ecosystem versus trying other apps out now. Like sometimes they venture back to Minecraft or there's some other things they do, but overall, like Roblox is able to kind of repeat whatever good game happens outside of Roblox. I feel like there's developers in Roblox that can quickly repeat that experience within Roblox so that the people can just stay within the Roblox platform and experience the same kind of thing. And it's kind of interesting. Like they put together the Squid Games game so fast, right? Once Squid Games was a hit, my kids were already playing it. I played it with them, or not with them. I played it on my own actually, and I was like, "Well, this is cool. It's like the real show." Um, so there's just some really incredible advantages it seems like Roblox has, and the ease of use. I think when I talk to people, I find that like I talk to other investors or people that are potentially investing, like, "Oh, what about Steam or Sandbox or these other things?" And the thing that Roblox I think is so great is it's like such an easy thing to use. Like you just put up the app on my kids have the app on their iPad. Like my dad, who's like or my mom or whatever can click the button on their app and just instantly be transported to socialize with their kids. They don't have to download plugins or files or figure stuff out. Once I tried to put Steam on my computer and it was like, I don't even know how to fiddle around with it to get it to work. You had to like try to look up, file names on Google thing. It was just like, I don't have time for that. But Roblox is just like, you touch and play. You don't have to worry about it. It's an entire vertically integrated. We talk about Tesla being vertically integrated. I feel like Roblox is like the virtual vertical integrated version in a way in terms of gaming and online experiences. So I think that's inherently a huge advantage. I mean, do you see any other platforms that kind of compete on that level of like vertical integration? I mean, I guess there's Epic Games, obviously. Anything different that we haven't talked about, or I mean, Epic and Minecraft and anything else that you can think of like that?
Epic and Microsoft are really the two, right? I mean, to your point about the vertical stack, if obviously you have the client facing layer. So, Roblox in this case has the Roblox client, which is where we all go in and interact. They have Roblox Studio, which is where you develop things.
Yeah,
They have back end infrastructure. They have the engine software. Unity went public, and we saw that stock do quite well, and we've seen
yeah,
demand for that. Related both to gaming, but also I think there's a lot built in terms of metaverse opportunities into Unity. Unity is going to be quite a big beneficiary there, I think, especially in sports, and we can get to that if you want. But
yeah,
then you look at the infrastructure side, right? They're building out their own cloud infrastructure to support all of this as well. So they are a cloud provider as well. And they're an app store, as you mentioned, they're basically their own app store, right? And I think their discovery needs work. I think, it's really hard to find things in the Roblox client that are interesting to you, and they need to work on that. And I think they'll admit that to you. But, at the end of the day, they are vertically integrated. I think Epic is there as well with the Epic Game Store. That's what they're going after. They obviously have Unreal Engine, which is their engine. They do some of their own infrastructure, I believe, and I think some of it is third party cloud. So, but I think that's normal. And then obviously Microsoft is a leading cloud provider. They have tons of back end tools for game development, as well as their game development. They bought a company called PlayFab about 2 years ago now, which is a lot of those multiplayer back end tools that is really interesting and embedded into Azure now. So they definitely have a lot of the tools as well with Minecraft. So I think those companies are quite vertically integrated, and I think that's what's going to give them the advantage. To your point, I think Facebook could get there. I think they're missing some of the pieces, and some of it they'll either have to buy or build or both. But I think they have a war chest to do it, and I think they're going to really push hard on it. You've already seen them do some small acquisitions to fill holes. They bought a company called Unit 2 Games, which has a UGC platform called Crata. I mentioned UGC as a big part of what I think the metaverse will be, and that was something they were lacking, and it filled a big hole for them.
Nice. And but I know Matt has a bunch of questions. I want to ask you one more thing before I let Matt start asking questions. I'm sorry, Matt. I keep jumping into questions.
I'm enjoying it.
Yeah. One other thing I hear used a lot, and when I hear people talk about it in specifics or technicalities, it goes over my head. But is there any, like, you seem to have a way to explain things to like people who don't, are like 5 years old. And could you explain like Unreal Engine? People talk about the Unreal Engine with Epic being such an advantage and so amazing. Can you explain that to me a little bit? Like, I'm 5 years old, and how it might compare to what Roblox has. That's, the version Roblox has versus the Unreal Engine of Epic.
Yeah. So the best analogy, I like to use analogies because it makes things simple, right? The best analogy for an engine is kind of like the operating system of your computer, right? So Microsoft Word is the application that runs on there. So that's like your game. Your engine is like Windows, right? So it provides all the base functions and computing know-how, so that way that application can run on top of it. So the engine does a lot of the physics, it does a lot of the visualization, it does a lot of the core features. So the game makers making that application can focus on actually making the game and not just like developing physics and stuff like that.
I see. Okay. And Roblox has kind of their own version of their physics, they built out in their, but it's maybe more clunky or not as easy or something, or not as efficient maybe as the Unreal Engine. I don't know. But people seem to think that's an advantage Epic has over everyone else. That's what I've heard. I listened to other analysts talk about it.
I think if you compare like Unreal Engine to Unity to Roblox, I think Unreal's is probably the most complex. It's also what I would call the heaviest. It's definitely the biggest file size. And for a long time, that's why Unity has done so much better on mobile than Unreal, because the file size for Unity is a lot lighter. It's a lot easier to make lightweight mobile games there. But we've already started to see a shift from like more casual mobile games, especially in the West now, towards more complex mid-core, hardcore games like shooters and whatnot. And so that's where Unreal really plays. That's their sweet spot. Remember, it's called Unreal Engine because it was built for Unreal Tournament, like the game, right? I mean, that was a shooting game 25 years ago or whatever, right? So, and then it was Gears of War. So it is built for shooters. And so, when these types of games really take off, that really supports them. But there's other games that have done well inside of Unreal. I mean, Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, which is one of my personal favorites that's come out in the last few years, is built in Unreal as well. So, there's definitely been a lot of successful things that have gone on inside of there. I mentioned Unity. They've really dominated on mobile. I think one of the other things that benefits them for mobile game developers is they also own an ad network. And so it's a lot of integrated solutions you can get from them. One-stop shop for both development tools and monetization. For Roblox, as you mentioned, I think that their engine, their development tools, they're rolling out their 3D graphics, they're rolling out their more high fidelity stuff, but it's going to take time for developers to adopt those and seed the market with games that, experiences that use that. But, they're trying to narrow the gap as best they can. They don't have to be as high fidelity as Unreal Engine is ever to be successful, particularly when you consider the audience, right? 50% of their DAUs are under 13. You mentioned your kids when you say 9, 7, and 5 play Roblox, right? But if you kind of look more broadly, something on the order of 80% or so of their DAUs are under 18 or under 21. And so, even the large percentage of their user base is young. And so they don't need Call of Duty grittiness to be successful.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So Matthew, that was actually kind of leading into a question I had. I mean, you brought up this concept of an oligopoly potentially kind of playing out in this space. So given, kind of the friction is the other term you used on the payment side, but like Emmet is kind of describing some friction that his kids have of just not wanting to find out like another application and trying to like muddle their way through that. Do you get the sense that there's going to be kind of a few winners, and so maybe Epic will handle the shooters for the older generation. Roblox is obviously has a less heavy engine like you said, and it just frankly looks a little bit kind of more clunky. Is that going to be kind of a static, they're just going to serve different users kind of in perpetuity? I mean, we know Roblox is very focused on kind of safety for their users, given not wanting to expose kids to some of the more divisive or I'd say rated R aspects that can come up on some of the other networks. Is that kind of how you see it? That there's just going to be these different winners that serve kind of different demographics within the marketplace, and those will kind of just naturally settle out around those demographics, or is there a more nuanced story there?
I think partly that's true. I mean, for Roblox, the biggest risk, to your point, is exactly that, the aging out risk. Because as the players get older, they have other opportunities. And so this is where the onus is on them to help their developers roll out these more, mid-core, hardcore experiences that take advantage of these new tools to retain them. This is where I also think the Metaverse live events really becomes a play, right? Because if you can have virtual concerts, and I don't just mean these experiences they've done that are kind of pre-recorded and you go in and jump around. I mean actual live events, and these are going to be coming in the next couple of years, where you can actually attend a concert inside of Roblox, 1 million people all at the same time or more. I think these sorts of events are going to be not only revenue generators but big retention tools, and that's going to be one of the big differentiators between the platforms is the live events platform that they're building. And so from that perspective, I really think that Roblox can succeed, but the aging out risk is definitely one of the biggest risks, if not the biggest risk to them right now. I did mention that roughly 80% of their DAUs are quite young. If you do kind of break down their DAU buckets, though, I think 17 to 21 is their fastest growing age bucket. So, and that's kind of encouraging that they're adding more users that are a bit older than like the average, which is obviously quite young. It shows that they're able to acquire users across the age groups. And it also shows, I think, that they're able to retain these users as they age up. I mean, that's basically college age. So it's not just, elementary school and younger kids, right? And so I think for them, that's going to be a big push. And again, I mentioned that's where I think, these new experiences and the live events really will play a big role.
I view the live events as like a great kind of option on their existing business model. One of the other things that they talked about, which kind of surprised me, but in retrospect, it made a lot of sense, but was talking about educational experiences and even maybe doing some stuff in the workplace around that. What's your thought on those efforts, and what would that maybe look like if they were successful, 5 years down the road? How big is that opportunity, do you think? 'Cause it seems new. And it's probably hard to pin down exactly how big that opportunity is.
So in our 800 billion market forecast, we don't have anything from enterprise or education. And the real reason for that is both those sectors move amazingly slow. If you look at like enterprise IT spending, for example, they're extremely slow to adopt new technologies because they're mostly risk averse, right? And so, how long it took a global pandemic for people to start using Zoom instead of in-person meetings, right? And unless there's some sort of catalyst like that to really drive adoption, it's really hard for people to change their patterns because CIOs are really risk averse. They only get yelled at by the CEO when things break. And usually things break when they try to fix things and change things. So their biggest incentive is just to make sure what they have works and they don't break it. Right. And so from that perspective, that's why I think enterprise is going to be very tough. I agree that over time, I think some sort of more immersive experiences will take hold in the enterprise. I'm just not quite sure Roblox is the company to benefit that, unless you're talking, 20 years from now when all of the young players that are Roblox players are now in the workplace and they're used to it. I think in the more near term, say 5 to 7 years, we've seen Cisco, who owns WebEx, they've rolled out a lot of features that are kind of similar in what you would call almost an enterprise metaverse platform. I think something like that is going to be much more amenable because it's built into something WebEx, which lots of enterprises already use today. Microsoft with Teams is a similar, in a similar position, right? Zoom as well, but They haven't really done anything like this. They've kind of just been trying to make sure Zoom doesn't break because everyone's using Zoom so much right now. But so I think from that perspective, enterprise is going to be tough. It's a long term opportunity and something they should have their eyes on. But in the near term, it's really tough to say it's going to move the needle. Education is in a similar boat. If you look at the education market, again, it took a global pandemic for them to decide to buy tablets and computers for everyone to take home with them. For the most part, education spending has been really tough for, tech overall to break into. And I think from the same perspective, it's going to take some really big draconian shift in the education industry for them to really adopt, these sorts of experiences. I think over time there's something there. We've already seen, Ubisoft actually with like Assassin's Creed, when they did Origins, the Egypt game, they actually did, they opened up the map basically to education opportunities for free, and they had some success with that. So I think there's something there. I just don't know how big it can get and how soon that will take hold. I think that's also a longer term play. So, as you look out on the 10-year, if you're looking at this from a long term, I'm going to buy Roblox because I think it's going to be, if not the leader, one of the leaders in the metaverse for the next 3 decades. These are opportunities to consider down the road. If you're looking at it, in the medium to long term, but like say the next 1 to 5 years, it probably is beyond that. And so if that's kind of your investable horizon, which a lot of people, in the old world would say 1 year is your investable horizon, but I think in the new kind of world, people look a little bit longer than that. But even for that longer term, horizon that people consider now, I think you're even thinking beyond that, in terms of the impact of these businesses. I think the live events and I think the branded content are the more near-term opportunities for Roblox to really execute on.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I mean, I guess that makes a lot of sense. I'd been kind of thinking about it as some scrappy developer who wants to kind of come up with a unique experience could do, I don't know, some sort of like tour the pyramids, kind of world, and put some great content in there, and you can buy some sort of unique accessory in a situation like that. I mean, is there any possibility for it to maybe evolve into an educational aspect in maybe going through non-traditional ways where you're not kind of dealing with the incumbent educational players? I mean, one of the great things about this whole platform, it seems to me, is that it's a true meritocracy. Whoever comes up with the best content, whichever developers are coming up with really great unique things that are valuable to users, they're the ones who seem to win out. And we know that Roblox is really focused on incentivizing ththose developers and making sure a high percentage of the fees get back to them. So could it maybe pan out in that sort of way?
There's definitely a potential there. I mean, things go viral for reasons that no one can explain. That's why they go viral. That's why that term is used, right? But I think, for example, we talked about the Squid Game experience in Roblox, right? Or some of these branded opportunities that have gone quote unquote viral. I think there's a lot of reason for that. And so I think you need a catalyst to really drive that, more so than just it's if you look at kind of the engagement and experiences, it's really consolidated amongst like the top echelon of experiences and roughly stays stable, except for these one-off new things that pop up because, they're based on something like Squid Game or Stranger Things that gets a lot of attention with that audience, that demographic. Right. But so it is quite hard. But, if there was a Netflix show that was based in ancient Egypt and it went really viral and everyone watched it, then yes, an ancient Egypt experience would do really well. But I don't think it's because of the education aspect. I think it's because of Netflix, right? I think, and so like I think that's what would drive it. But yes, I think there's definitely the chance that can happen. But that would kind of be a one-off. Get lucky. I think in terms of the way that I think about the education opportunity, it's really about embedding Roblox into course curriculums in primary schools and secondary schools, right? And to do that, you'd really have to win over educators and school districts and go, basically around the world and do that. And that's a much tougher task for the reasons I talked about before.
Yeah. Yeah, man, I like your idea. I wonder if, I mean, yeah, the traditional way I think is probably more likely, but the innovation from this flywheel, I wouldn't, there could be some way we don't think of that something new goes viral, and maybe something even like, man, like you were saying, like maybe Roblox would create some kind of parental control. Parents could easily toggle on and off to say, okay, education mode, and the experiences that are deemed like educational, the kids can then use that only for that time. and the kids would certainly do that, versus not doing any screen time probably. But they would prefer, the free play where they could do anything. But there's probably going to be, I would think there's going to be some really cool, viral, innovative things. Hopefully something in the positive way with education. We'll see. I mean, time will tell, but there'll be some new things that I'm sure get innovated over time. In terms of, like you mentioned, you're doing a lot of stuff in Asia now, Matthew. What are your thoughts on China with the recent ban on gaming, or not the ban, but it's like 2 hours on Friday, or I forget what it is. It's like an hour on Friday, an hour on Saturday or something for everyone under 18. And they, and it's really been very interesting. Do you think Roblox, I mean, they were kind of just starting to get their feet wet in China at that time. And do you think that's a big obstacle or a big, damper on their ambitions in China? What are your thoughts about that?
I think Roblox is DOA in China because of the rules. And, just to wind the clock back and set the stage for those that are kind of new to the China story, this is more of the same from what happened in 2018. So in 2018, the regulators at the time, there was actually two different ones that were getting merged together, which is part of the reason the process took so long to resolve itself. But they put a ban on new game approvals. And in China at the time, you needed two game approvals to launch a new game. You needed approval for the content and approval for monetization. Now it's one approval because they merged the regulators together.
Okay.
So at the time, what they were saying is, we want to reduce screen time for minors. We want to reduce certain types of content that they're seeing. We want people to do more than just play games all the time. And so that was the purpose for doing that. And so they really started to crack down on types of content that were being released. They went back and looked through a lot of these games, and they really cleaned up a lot of the app ecosystem for a lot of these, scammy type games, things like Mahjong, which is kind of like gambling and frowned upon. And they really focused on things that they thought were, creative and interesting and not harmful to what they thought of society. So when we get to the current crackdown, it's a lot of the same concerns. It's actually mostly the same thing. There's pretty much nothing new in terms of the concerns. I think the biggest thing that we're seeing is just an acceleration of the restrictions and the ability to roll them out. So Tencent was already rolling out a way to reduce playtime for minors inside of Honor of Kings, which is their version of, it's a mobile MOBA game like League of Legends. It's called Arena of Valor Outside the World. In case you don't know, Honor of Kings happens to be the largest mobile game in the world,
Wow.
with over 100 million daily active users.
Wow.
So it's quite a powerhouse. So, and that's only in China basically, right? And so,
Wow. What company does that? Is that Tencent or something?
that's Tencent's game.
Okay.
And so, for them, that's they were already trying to work that out. And so the restrictions coming from the government are sharper than what they were doing. So as you mentioned, they're restricting playtime to 1 hour per day, only on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays for anyone under 18. And to
Yeah.
enforce that, you have to log in with a real ID. So you have to actually link your ID card to the game. And they're also rolling out facial recognition and other features like fingerprint scans to actually authorize that as well. So you can't just like steal your parents' ID card and log in as them and get away with
Yeah.
it. You actually have to scan your face, your fingerprint.
That is
Also
such a
to get
different
Siblings fighting
world.
about it,
Wow.
stealing each other's IDs and saying, "You logged in my ID and used up my time." Yeah.
So that was part of the problem, even with the things they were rolling out with the ID registration was, I mean, there was a gray market for fake IDs, just like, American kids get fake IDs to buy alcohol. In China, they were
Yeah.
buying fake IDs to play Honor of Kings. I mean, that was actually
Yeah.
a thing. And so,
Yeah.
this is part of this is all to crack down on all of that bad behavior. And also to, at the end of the day, they do want to reduce the amount of time students are spending on screens. They want them to be learning. You've also seen them crack down on online education. This is more broadly about, leveling the playing field for education, making it more fair, giving opportunities for people that don't just have all the money in the world to hire all these tutors to excel and get good jobs and move up the echelon of the social structure in China.
Mhm.
So, it's all part of that same concern. At the end of the day, for Tencent and the gaming industry overall, minors are a quite small percentage of spending. It's a
Okay.
larger percentage of users. It's only about 5% of Tencent's domestic revenue. It's like only like 1% of NetEase. That's the second largest gaming company in China. Others like Bilibili, who obviously skew to Gen Z, it's going to be a bigger hit to them. And then obviously Roblox, because it skews so heavily to under 18, it
It's a
really
big hit.
makes it tough to be encouraged about the platform going forwards. The upside is it's very nascent. They're building basically from scratch because the experiences you can play in China are completely separate and walled off from the experiences in the rest of the world. So it just puts the onus on them to build different experiences that are going to attract an older audience, which is something that they really haven't done successfully globally yet. And so we have to see what gets built and what types of audience they can attract. But, if you look at kind of like the download trends and some of the engagement trends that we get from third parties, it hasn't been awe-inspiring at all so far in China. It's definitely a slow and steady long-term approach already that they were going for in China. The regulations just make it much harder for that to be successful. So, before the listing and up to the listing, I thought there's potential for them to, get sizable users and maybe start making a couple $100 million a year, early on and scale that in China. I've written it to zero in my mind. It's pretty much non-existent. If it goes anywhere, good for them, but it's really tough to see that being successful now.
Yeah, and you cover you cover all of Asia, I believe, right? So, I mean, I heard Dave Bazuki, the founder of Roblox, and I think in the developers conference a few weeks ago, he gave a presentation, but he mentioned in there that they're seeing something like rampant or viral growth in Japan now. I mean, do you think there's other markets in Asia that Roblox is really taking off in? I mean, over 70% of their users are now outside of the U.S. and Canada. So that's obviously Europe, Brazil, they said was in the past big. And what parts of Asia do you think it's kind of taking off in, and why? What would you speculate on what the reasons are if you had to?
So I think Japan and Korea have been very strong for a while. Those are kind of like the developed economies in Asia. They're huge gaming markets, so it totally makes sense. The younger generation of gamers looking for things, especially if you look at the games that exist in those countries, they tend to be very mature, hardcore experiences. Lots of MMORPG type games, even on mobile, they're really intense. And for a younger audience, that might be too intense. And so Roblox is a great opportunity for these kind of more casual experiences for them that aren't as prevalent for on mobile devices, especially. So it totally makes sense that Roblox has been successful in those countries. If you look at kind of the mobile gaming market, if you look at the global gaming market, China and US are about each a quarter of global gaming sales, plus or minus, changes year to year, blah, blah, blah. Japan's the third largest country by gaming revenue. It's also quite a large population. Korea is only about 4% of global game sales. It's just a smaller country. But Japan's a big gaming market as well. And so being able to be successful in Japan is, especially because it's such a hard market to penetrate if you're an outside company. Culturally and just kind of the cultural preferences for content. So having success in Japan with anime style games that have been quite successful on the Roblox platform is really good for them, because that's transportable to Korea, to China, eventually to other parts of Asia. When you look at emerging Asia, you're really talking Southeast Asia, because that's a huge opportunity with rising digital penetration amongst consumers across everything. Look at C Limited, the stock. You look at Grab, which is coming public in next month. Other companies that are going to be listing from that region in due course. Goto is probably the next big one to watch. That's the merger of Gojek and Tokopedia. But if you just kind of look at the trends that are happening in Southeast Asia, there's going to be huge demand for digital platforms across services, not just gaming and metaverse, but for ride hailing and food delivery and everything. In digital banking, fintech. But at the end of the day, the purchasing power of those consumers is still quite small. And so one of the things you've seen happen recently with Roblox is, even though they're growing their DAOs, even though they're growing their bookings, their average bookings per daily active user, or their app DAO, is actually starting to roll over. And that's kind of expected, because they're pretty much saturated in developed North America and developed Europe, right? They've pretty much acquired all the users they're going to get. They'll get some incremental, but for the most part, they're pretty saturated. And a lot of the growth now is coming from emerging Asia and Latin America, where the purchasing
Although they're
power
trying to get older users, they're trying to get an older demographic, which you would think would increase the bookings if they do overall, but maybe it's not enough to offset the emerging daily active users they're getting overall. Yeah.
I mean, I know that like India, for example, is another economy, right? India, for example, huge population, over 1 billion people, right? And huge wealth inequality, but GDP per capita is only $1,000 US.
Yeah.
It's 17,000 in China. It's 60 something thousand in the US, to put it in perspective, right? So, it's 30 something thousand, I think, across the EU. So just the purchasing power of consumers in these economies just isn't there. And so it's going to, it's great to have the eyeballs, especially when you start talking about the branded advertising opportunities to offset the direct spending in-app purchase revenue that they generate. And that's going to be interesting there, how they do that. But from an ABPU perspective, it's obviously going to be dilutive in the near term, because so much of the user growth is going to come from emerging regions.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because Just as an example, an anecdote, like my kids, they were playing with one of their friends. The four of them were playing this game called like Superhero Tycoon in Roblox, and I surprised joined them, and they were on their same team. There's like four people to a team. I went to another team, and they spend their allowance on Roblox a lot, and they're very careful about how they spend their money. Some days they just want to spend it all at once, but other days they're careful. But I have a Roblox account, and I've never really spent money, but I found myself just like buying all the stuff, and in like 20 minutes I spent like $30 to get like all the cool superhero stuff and like surprise them and be like, I'm gonna kill you all, and they're all like, daddy, and they were like jumping on me trying to get me to get off the computer. It was a fun experience as a parent, but I spent so much money in like 20 minutes. I was like, what the, I can't believe I did that, buying all these upgrades to my superhero. And I could see it, in certain, it's probably quite distribution. At the tail end you might have some people spending like thousands and thousands of dollars, on their Roblox experiences in a day, even. And at the other end, obviously, there's so many people that spend zero. Like my kids spent zero for the first year they played it. It wasn't until later they realized they can, get their allowance, on there and stuff. And so
I was going to ask that because my ETF analyst in New York, he pays his kids allowance in Robux now, and that spending curve you talk about is totally true. A lot of games, especially the hardcore games, you definitely see the whale distribution. It's similar to like a casino, right? It's like you have the people that spend a lot. I used to play a hardcore mobile game religiously, Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes, and I spent a little bit of, I spent more money than I care to admit, but I know people that were spending thousands of dollars a month just to play a mobile game and just remain competitive. And so there's definitely games that have that distribution. The more casual the games get, though, if you look at like Candy Crush, it's less reliant on whales. It's more reliant on a lot of people spending a little bit, which I think Roblox probably falls into more so than that type of hardcore distribution. But there still definitely are whales that are probably driving significant spending, exactly to your point.
Yeah, and a new kind of revenue stream, relatively new for Roblox, that I think is interesting, that the guy Dave Bazuki mentioned in this conference, developers conference a few weeks back, was that they're going to introduce subscription for the developers, so that not only for Roblox itself they have their just subscription, but within the different developers will be able to create a game that allows the players to sign up for a subscription just for that game within Roblox, which I thought was really fascinating, in a way to kind of incentivize these developers in a very different way to keep, instead of, it's going to be, they're really doing a lot to try to increase the innovation. Like I think they changed their pay scale recently to also pay the developers more for the engagement time or something, right?
Yeah.
And
So I was about to say that exactly. That's it. So historically, most of the revenue in Roblox was driven by buying cosmetics for your avatar. And so that was people can create cosmetics and they can be sold, and then the creator gets a percentage, or they're made by Roblox, they're branded potentially, like the Gucci stuff, right? Whatever that is. And that goes on your avatar, and you take that from experience to experience. It doesn't matter where you go, the developer of that experience gets no cut of that revenue. There was also items that were exclusive to experiences. And that's where the developers got, to your point, what you talked about before, where you bought the things inside the experience to go beat your kids, right? Those sorts of things, that revenue goes straight to the developer of that experience. What they're shifting to now is what they call experience-based payouts. So rather than being item-based, the more time you spend inside of an experience, the more money that developer is going to get as a percentage of the payout. And so they're shifting it to incentivize developers for retention, to keep players engaged and keep them in their experiences, rather than just, milk them dry as quickly as possible and then move on to the next thing. And so I think in the long run, that's going to be better, because it's going to, create more complex and more, more attractive experiences overall for the platform. So I think that's a good thing. It's going to be, and when you think about how that's going to increase payouts alongside, we talked about the Apple commissions and the mobile commissions. As mobile commissions come down, that's also, they're gonna turn around. I mentioned mobile game makers are going to get higher gross margin. Roblox just said they're going to turn around and pay out more money to developers because of that. They're just going to, and obviously they're going to get economies of scale as the business grows, and they'll be able to increase payouts. So you shouldn't expect too much margin expansion, because they're going to reinvest that back in developers. But they're also going to be able to reinvest those commissions that currently go to Apple and Google back into payouts as well. And so that should help drive developer retention and drive the flywheel of the platform that you were discussing.
So, Matthew, we've talked a lot about kind of, the different pockets of users and different platforms that might appeal to them over time. I'm curious, though, kind of taking a step back and just talking about the metaverse a little bit. How do you kind of see that expanding over time? I mean, is this the sort of thing that you think is going to get, 20 times bigger from where it is today in 10 years? Or I guess how quickly do you see that progression happening? And is it as big of a thing in your eyes as kind of all the current talk would make it seem?
Roblox, I said, is closing in on $3 billion of revenue. We think the metaverse can be 800 billion. And if you layer in some opportunities I didn't even count, it's well in excess of $1 trillion. There's a huge opportunity for all these platforms. And as I mentioned, it's because I look at them as the next generation of social networks. So all the social network advertising revenue is going to have to shift to these platforms. It's inevitable. Just like they had to change their brands for Facebook, they had to change their brands for Instagram, they had to change their brands for TikTok. They're going to have to change their brands for Roblox and Horizon from Facebook and Minecraft and all these other platforms, because this is where the eyeballs are going to be, and this is where they need to be to monetize and drive brand value. So I think that's absolutely going to be massive, and that's why I'm so excited about the metaverse. Alongside that, I mentioned the live events. We talked a bit about concerts. Sports is another one I think is going to be quite interesting. And I mentioned Unity there. They hired Peter Moore, who was a gaming executive for a while. He was an executive at Sega. He was an executive at EA. He then went and was the CEO of Liverpool FC, for a few years. Now he's gone to Unity to run their virtual sports business. And so what I think is they're going to do is they're going to create a white label interactive experience for sports leagues and teams to license and build on top of. And so basically creating metaverse experiences to put you inside of a stadium during a game that you can't attend physically. I think that's going to be a massive opportunity down the road. So that's another area as well. And so when you just think about all of the things that are getting touched by the metaverse over the next several years, there's such a huge opportunity ahead. And that's why I think you just have to look at it and say, these companies are disruptive. They're the next iteration of the internet, of social networks. And, even if you take out the whole decentralized Web3 aspect, which is something that's taking off in corners of the metaverse development, there's still so much investment and so much interest. And, our last podcast episode I mentioned we did with Kathy Hackle, she talked about brands, but, every company is going to need some sort of, maybe not name a chief metaverse officer, but something along the lines of that, someone who is going to be driving the brand of these companies and driving their strategy around the metaverse. Companies are going to need Roblox developers to build it. For example,
they're going to have a presence in Roblox, right? I mean,
they're going to need a virtual store.
Need
they're going to need to be there, and they're going to need, maybe it's just one person, or maybe it's someone at Roblox that they're paying to do it, whatever it is, but they're going to need a presence
their own team
there.
of developers to create their own experience in Roblox. Yeah.
Exactly. And so it's not just hire a marketing firm and stick something on Instagram anymore. You're going to need developers who know how to run a live service, a live game, a live experience, and manage that for years, not just, do a campaign on Instagram. And so it's going to upend the marketing world. And I think that's why it's so exciting.
Yeah. Sort of like, like now you see at a lot of the companies, like, meme officers, like people that are hired as marketing people just to create memes for $100,000 a year for a company's brand. It's crazy. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Matthew, that there's going to be interesting ways that, marketing departments are going to have to play the metaverse, and Roblox is, probably going to be a part of it in our view. I think of it as a slice of it. There's lots of slices available, but and just one.
I think of the metaverse as like a shopping mall.
Yeah.
I like analogies, right? So if you think of it as a shopping mall, you've got your anchor tenants. In the past it was like Sears and Macy's, right? So it's Roblox, it's Fortnite, it's Facebook potentially, it's Minecraft potentially, right? It's Tencent. These are your anchor tenants, and then you've got these smaller experiences throughout the shopping mall. You've got Abercrombie and Fitch, you've got Tiffany, you've got all the brands, and they've all got small experiences along the way. You've got the decentralized; those are kind of like the pop-up kiosk potentially, like and they kind of sit in the public areas and they connect, right? But that's kind of the way that I think about the metaverse, and so from that perspective, it's not one company that's going to dominate. Potentially, the company that's going to dominate the metaverse doesn't exist yet. It's entirely possible, right? Facebook didn't exist, 20 years ago, right? So, it's that's entirely possible. But I think Roblox is, for Epic and these other companies are the best candidates to be the leaders in this space as it develops.
Yeah. You mentioned the 800 billion kind of reference for what was that, 2025? Is that it? Is kind
24,
of the
yeah.
total addressable market opportunity in the next 2 or 3 years, 3 years, let's say. And I believe that. Do you happen to know offhand, like what it was in 2021, measured by the same metrics? Was it 100 billion or 300 billion, or like just trying to get a gauge for what the multiplier is from now versus 3 or 4 years ago, based on that report?
It's about doubling versus 2020.
Okay.
So what goes into that market size is obviously the gaming software and services market, in-game advertising, the engine software market, which is, I did a forecast for that as well. The gaming hardware market, the AR, VR hardware, and then the live entertainment and social advertising. And so when you couple that all together, you get very close to 800 billion in 2024 versus about 450 billion in 2020. So it's almost doubling.
Okay. Cool. And another thing, I think I think part of I mean, obviously, a big part of the success to Epic and Roblox is the founders. Tim Sweeney and Dave Baszucki and his senior team that have been there for a long time. I mean, Dave Bazooka, he's impressive to me. Like, he's got this vision. He's not playing the short game by any means. He's playing the long, long game on this from the beginning. And he's sticking with that. And he's pivoting here and there, but he's kind of sticking within his vision, I think. And I don't know. What are your thoughts on him as a founder, I guess, versus Tim Sweeney? Like, what do you think are what's good or what's bad about either of them? What would you say?
I think for Dave, I mean, Roblox in its current form was basically built 16 years ago is when it started, right? And
Yeah.
he's been he's been trying to build the metaverse for 16 years,
Yeah.
from the ground up. This isn't new. This isn't buzzwords. We're jumping in on it. They've been doing this for 16 years. So, from that perspective, that's why I think that, they're all in on this, and they've been all in on it for so long because they've been doing it since inception. Whereas like someone like Facebook, I think that they've been toying with the idea of metaverse and these virtual worlds and everything for a few years now with Oculus and some of the things they've done with Horizon, but it's only been a few years for them. I think Epic has really been focused on this for a while as well. I think they've been more vocal about it only recently, but I think it's been a big part of, you talk to people that work there and talk to, like, even here's Tim Sweeney. It's everything they do is metaverse. Everything they do is focus on the metaverse now. And so I do think it's also part of their DNA to a large degree. And so I think from that perspective, that's what makes these companies, such good candidates to lead, is because it's not just buzzwords. It's not just hopping on the latest thing. It's really, for them, it's really part of their DNA.
Yeah. And one other question that's kind of a sidebar or tangent to everything we've been talking about is this pay to play craze. Axie Infinity in the Philippines is huge, and there's others trying to do the similar thing. I was looking at a game called Thetan Arena, and there's others like Sidus, it's like, as soon as Axie Infinity like blew up like it did, it feels like now there's 1,000 others trying to do the same thing. Do you think this is like the pay to play model? Number one, is this going to be like a sticking business model that sticks, or do you think it's more of like a fad? And if it's going to kind of stick around, do you think somehow Roblox incorporates it, or is able to incorporate it somehow? I mean, I don't know if they would, or how Dave would do it, but do you think there's I guess innovation, anything can happen, but I guess my main question is, do you think this pay to play model is here to stay or more of a fad? What are your thoughts about that?
It's clearly in a bubble right now because, a ton of people that are like quitting traditional gaming jobs and going into blockchain gaming to do pay to
Yeah.
earn games or play to earn games, right? So
Yeah.
there's clearly a lot of hype and bubble and financing. You look at the VC market for gaming, which a lot of it's going to this stuff, is insane right now. So
Yeah.
it's definitely there. Do I think long term there's potential for this? Yes. But I think for the most part, the large companies, the incumbent game makers, these large platforms like Roblox, they're going to watch it and they're going to kind of stay on the side. Ubisoft, you saw, invested in Animoca Brands, which has the sandbox and a few other things, right? I
Yeah.
think that's how these large companies are going to look at this for now because, I think there's too much risk. So much of revenue for these companies comes from loot boxes and other probability based rewards. And for a long time, there's been a lot of concern. Are these gambling? Are they just selling
Yeah.
gambling in a video game?
Yeah.
And there's no fixed legal rule around this, but a large consensus of the community is so long as you can't convert these items back to real money, it's not gambling. right? It can look like gambling, but because you can't cash out for real money, like in FIFA Ultimate Team, you can't convert your things to real money. That's kind of why it hasn't come under the gun too much, except for like maybe Belgium. The US has largely stayed away from it because of that.
Yeah.
Now, if you start enabling people to sell these things that they get probability based by putting in money, it looks like a slot machine, right? Because you're able to cash out your rewards. And now it's gambling. And yes, gambling rules are changing, but they're much more regulated. They're not the same everywhere. State by state, country by country, the rules are different. And so I think as long as there's regulatory uncertainty, you're going to see a lot of large companies stay on, kind of stay watching and stay away from it until we get to a point where there's, more of a regulatory framework in place, not just for play to earn, but crypto as a whole, blockchain, all of these things, NFTs. Once there's more of a regulatory framework in place for all of these types of technologies and assets, then I think you can start to see some of these larger companies step in and take a leading position in these industries. I just think it's going to be a while.
One last question I wanted to bring up or ask you is, if you were like someone trying to imagine if you were someone that's bearish on Roblox, the stock, a company, obviously you don't think highly of if you're bearish on the stock, I would say, but what do you think would be like the top points for someone who's kind of bearish on the stock and or the company? What would you say?
The aging out risk, I think, is a big one. I mean, you also need live events and branded advertising to take off to justify the valuation. And so if those start to stumble, that's obviously, that's a risk. And so that stuff can't, if you don't think that's going to work, there is a bear case. At the end of the day, you can't just short a stock because of valuation, right? If you compare Roblox to every other gaming company, it's insanely expensive on just a pure valuation basis, right? No matter how you cut it.
Yes.
But, people have lost a lot of money doing that the last few years in lots of stocks. And the reason for that is because you need a catalyst. You can't just short something purely on valuation. And so you need one of these risks to materialize and cause a catalyst for the valuation to collapse. And, I just don't see that. I think the aging out risk is a bigger risk than the live events platform and the branded content. I just think those are going to be such powerful drivers that they can even possibly overcome the aging out risk, over the next several years. And so, for me, those are kind of like the two big bear cases, but, I remain quite bullish on Roblox as a leader in this business. I think you guys agree.
Yeah, no, we certainly do. Yeah, no, it's fascinating talking, and your podcast, Into the Metaverse, that's what it's called, right? Yeah, I wrote it down. I'm definitely going to subscribe and start listening. Want to hear what you have to say. Who I think is also really insightful. Have you heard of Matthew Ball? Yeah, he's got a lot of good discussions he's done on Roblox in the past, or just the metaverse in general and how he thinks of it. I think he's a former Amazon executive or something, and now he's like advisor on a new ETF called Meta, META.
Yeah, so I was about to say, so he worked with the guys at Roundhill who are buddies of mine.
Will,
Roundhill.
I know.
Yeah, Will and Mario is kind of their metaverse
Yeah.
thought leader. So they've worked with Matt closely to form that ETF and get that out there, and they've done very well. I think it eclipsed 100 million of AUM in under 2 months, which is insane.
Yeah, very fast. For an ETF, yeah. I mean, Matthew Ball, he's the influencer, I think, that got it for them, and he's well-deserved an influencer in this space. Super smart, bright guy, the way he puts things. And I think that he tweeted out that NVIDIA is their top holding, but Roblox is their second top holding. I think it's like 7% of their ETF or something. So he obviously thinks very highly of Roblox being like the top advisor on the picks for that. So I think there's a lot of smart people betting on Roblox. I think ARK Investment has some Roblox, obviously us, we're hopefully we'll be right one day,
The smartest.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people thought it was a one-trick pony with the COVID. And I think we're starting to discover that, no, it's still growing fast. And it was just a nice catalyst to kind of boost its growth even faster temporarily. So yeah, we'll see over time, and we're looking forward to chatting with you again in the future, hopefully, Matthew, and listen and subscribing to your podcast. Thanks a lot for coming on.
Thanks for having me.